Money is awesome. If you ignore the fact that it's the root of all evil, money is so good that I'd probably go ahead and buy some for $1. But if there's anything I like as much as money, it would be finding a way to tie in miscellaneous topics into video games. Just like food, water, shelter, and your bills, video games cost money. But unlike all of those things I just listed off, video games are actually necessary. Since the dawn of man, the prices of video games have been a hotly debated topic amongst those who are in their 30s and still live with their parents. Back in the 80s and 90s, video games were very expensive. The prices of games from the 8 and 16-bit eras are comparable with those of today, but that's not even adjusting for inflation, so they cost even more than that. What the hell happened in here? If you've ever felt buyer's remorse before, just remember that at least you didn't pay $65 for Shaq Fu. I'm really thankful I didn't grow up in this time period, because then I wouldn't have ever owned anything and would be cursed to rent games instead. God, imagine that, just not owning your video games. What a dystopian, horrible world to live in. I'm no expert, but if I had to find a way to explain the cost behind these games at the time, I'd have to assume it has something to do with games from this era originally coming in cartridges. As opposed to the discs we see nowadays, cartridges include a lot more components that when all added up make them more expensive to produce. Now, if you've been online for any longer than 3.5 seconds, then you probably know the story by now. Long story short, at one period in time in the mid-90s, Nintendo and Sony were collaborating to create a disc-based console. However, after Miyamoto realized that if they went through with this collaboration, we would live in a world where Hotel Mario didn't exist, Nintendo told Sony to go kill themselves. So Sony started to run things back with the PlayStation, which used discs that could hold more data, providing more room for content and higher quality audio. More importantly than that, however, is that they were a lot cheaper to manufacture in comparison to cartridges. Nintendo, meanwhile, decided to stick with cartridges as they were sturdier, and more importantly, it didn't suffer from load times as bad as those stinky old discs did. And, well, look at where that got them. If you look at the two prices side by side, you'll see that PlayStation games were typically cheaper. Because of the numerous benefits to putting games on discs, the following generation, that became the standard for all of the major players in the gaming industry. Except Nintendo wanted to be quirky and used funny looking discs shaped like this.
This looks like a fucking chocolate chip cookie!
From this point onward, it seemed as though game prices would simmer down a bit, as from what I can gather, up to $50 was the standard around this time, with titles for handheld games being a little cheaper than that. Again, not adjusted for inflation. The generation following brought the prices up to $60, with the advances brought along by the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. I didn't have to worry about that though, because I was a Nintendo kid, and sure, the Wii wasn't much more powerful than the GameCube, but because the tech wasn't improved enough, that means Nintendo didn't really have an excuse to raise the prices of their games, so it worked out for me. No, it wasn't until the Wii U rolled around that they jumped on that train, and boy, you wouldn't believe what they printed their games on this time! I remember as a kid when I was at GameStop and saw Nintendo Land for $60, I thought gaming was so over, dude. But as humans do, we adapted, we survived. It seemed as if video games would finally plateau at that price. After all, it was at this point that technology was beginning to hit its peak and leaps in graphics and performance between console generations weren't as large anymore. But not too long ago, something terrible happened. How did we get here? In the past few years, we've begun to see gaming companies charge a brand new premium price tag of $70 for certain AAA titles. And I don't prefer this. Applying monetary value to a video game is a very difficult thing to do. And because as an art form, there's a lot of factors that can go into making a game valuable. There's the amount of entertainment on offer, how fun the game is, how much lasting appeal it has, its impact, and graphical fidelity. Because of all these factors and how greatly they can vary and make each video game different from one another, I don't think it's possible to attribute a price to all video games. However, I do think the average price throughout the years was a product of trying to balance profit while still having an acceptable price for the consumer. If you're a poor sap working a minimum wage job and you just gotta play all the brand new releases, then you're gonna die. Luckily for me, I don't give two shits about new video games because new video games suck, and I'd rather just buy stuff on Steam for 2 cents when the summer sale rolls around and proceed to not play any of them. Yeah, Portal is like 2 hours long and I got it for $1, but sir, you don't understand. I simply don't have enough time to play it. Sometimes though, you buy and play a game and well, you sorta just Feel ripped off. Did you pay full price for Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival? Oh no, couldn't be me. Nuh-uh, nuh-uh, nuh-uh! I think we've all at one point felt unsatisfied with the game and the money spent on it. Whether the game was light on substance, not fun, poorly made, or plagued with any of the other countless problems games are prone to, it's very uncommon for me to come out of a game I spent full price on saying that I was 100% content with what I paid for it. Especially considering how expensive video games are getting now and the numerous greedy business decisions made with them. To this day, I'm embarrassed that I own Amiibo Festival, and I'm pretty sure it's going to go on my gravestone. One of the most common factors used to determine a video game's worth is the time it takes to beat it, and in theory, this mindset sorta makes sense, but under scrutiny, it holds up about as well as wet bread. I think games should be a decent length, and if something has too little to offer for its asking price, then it's a lot harder to recommend. However, at the same time, quality matters above all else. I will happily take a $60 game with a 10-hour campaign that was a blast beginning to end and offers replayability or other things to do after the credits over a game that costs the same price with a longer runtime that's utilized less good. I noticed that a lot of modern games have inconsistent quality and have segments where less care was evidently put into certain parts, or have a ton of filler trash to pad out playtime. Sure, Super Mario Odyssey has 18 billion moons, but the care put into those placements varies wildly. It's as if the devs wanted to boast a high collectible count to impress consumers and make it seem like you were getting more bang for your buck, when in reality you could complete one of the other 3D Marios in less time and have a more engaging experience. I think we'd all be happier if in a sequel they trimmed the fat and made more platforming challenges in favor of the repetitive and effortless tasks you do to get half the moons. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it's no masterpiece. I can name more than a handful of games that suffer from overstaying their welcome that already had more than enough on offer to be worth their price tag, as well as those that require you to do superfluous stuff for 100% completion that turns your brain into total sludge. You know, I freaking hate that dog-ass trash, dude, and not enough people call it out aside from the Odyssey example I pointed to a second ago if you forgot. Why add in all this nothing content if it's going to be so boring that I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole? I mean, if I wanted to turn my brain into the slop that they put in the McDonald's ice cream machine, I'd watch The Big Bang Theory.
Thought about killing myself!
This is why when somebody calls a game too short, I take it with a grain of salt. I often think back to this one Steam review of Resident Evil 7 I saw a long time ago that stated that the game would have been more worth the price tag had the roughly 7-hour campaign stretched out to a runtime of 30 hours. For a survival horror game. I think that behavior has thankfully died down and people can learn to appreciate shorter titles, but dude, some people really need to learn that 20 plus hours of gameplay is a lot longer than you might think. I mean, if you're employed anyway. Playtime should rarely be used to determine price. Some games can be long, but get that length from poor pacing. It may sound good that I got 60 hours of playtime from a game I paid $60 for, but how much of that time can you really say was spent doing something meaningful? But all of this brings me to a very important question. Why is this discussion so relevant nowadays? I never used to hear people debate over this topic a few console generations ago, so what happened? Well, to oversimplify things, Obama. I don't actually think it was his fault, I just like saying his name. If we want to be fair, video game prices now are about the same, if not a little less than they used to be. However, everything else has gone up. Now, I hate to break the news to you guys, but remember when I said this? Just like food, water, shelter, and your bills, video games cost money. But unlike all of those things I just listed off, video games are actually necessary. Yeah, well, video games are actually the least important of those things I named off. Unfortunately, us gamers cannot justify spending $60 on potential mid when that money could be spent on, like, Cheez-Its instead. And maybe this is just a personal thing, but I honestly think the quality of games has been on a decline for a while now. Why spend so much money on new games I don't really like whenever I could be buying old games that commonly go on sale and get more enjoyment from them? Yeah, that's right, I busted out the old thing good, new thing bad! I remember a while back, Masahiro Sakurai of Super Smash Bros. Fame made a video on his YouTube channel discussing the same topic I'm discussing now. He provides a unique perspective, stating that not only are most games worth that $60 price tag, but they're in fact worth a lot more than that, citing that games offer more to a consumer than movies or other forms of entertainment, because video games can offer way more hours of fun. It's an optimistic but perfectly valid view that I totally respect, but unfortunately for him, in my script this segment is titled cooking Sakurai. Now let me preface this by saying that outside of dicking around on RPG Maker for several hours and accomplishing very little, I have no experience in game development. Meanwhile, Sakurai has years upon years of experience. So obviously, that makes me more qualified to speak about this matter. I don't take issue with his general opinions. My problem with this video comes from how he doesn't even touch on how a lot of games nowadays are plagued with day one DLC that inflate the price of the total package even more, or incomplete buggy messes that are still shipped at full price, and these are far more common than they should be. I can totally respect his optimism, and you know what? His experience in the industry has probably helped give him an eye for certain qualities in games that he can acknowledge and appreciate that I can't. However, due to his involvement in game development, I doubt he wants to touch on those unpleasant aspects of the pricing discussion that desperately need to be called out and exposed more. I'm not saying that he's wrong or incorrect. I mean, all he's doing is offering a different perspective developed through a different set of circumstances, and that's fine, and I encourage that. But I don't think this video paints the full picture, and I know that a bunch of his diehard fans had a total 180 in opinions as soon as he published this video. No! You cannot say that, logician! Maybe he didn't bring these negative aspects up because he wanted the video to be strictly positive, but if you want to properly discuss this topic, I don't think you can only acknowledge the most ideal circumstances. Some of you might think it's unnecessary to even bring this video up, but around the time it came out, it got me to think more about this topic seriously. And also, I should clarify that even though I don't entirely agree with it, I don't think it's a bad video by any means. This willingness to excuse games for costing so much because some of them will offer you hundreds of hours of entertainment and memories you'll never forget, and countless others will nickel and dime you, be a derivative of their predecessors, pad itself out with meaningless gameplay, and some won't even be finished, really tickles my balls. It always baffles me, however somebody dares to call a video game's price into question, there is always going to be one person who has been prepping their throat for their entire life for this very moment. I really don't understand why individuals will complain about the cost of living, as they should, but then turn around and defend paying more money for entertainment. And you know that extra money isn't going towards developers. In fact, out of everyone involved in the industry, they're getting it worse than ever. Crunch time is commonplace, layoffs are getting disturbingly prevalent, and budgets for games have ballooned to a comedic proportion, reaching digits that match my body count. There seems to be a total disconnect between what the bigwigs of the gaming industry think gamers want and what gamers actually want. And I think what they think we want are cinematic experiences that look cool and make us feel cool. But
I disagree.
From the days as early as the Atari 2600, graphics were a huge selling point for games. Every new generation of consoles was able to make huge advancements in technology in order to immerse the players further into their world. I mean, look at the PlayStation 1 compared to the PlayStation 2. This is a shift the likes of which we'll never see again, because at this point the ceiling just isn't very far away anymore. I think the final frontier is just getting modern consoles on par with PCs in terms of performance, but after that, I don't think there's anywhere left to go. Now, there's a reason why, aside from Sony copers, everyone collectively clowns on the PlayStation 5. Sure, it's a perfectly fine console, but it barely has anything to its name aside from being a stronger PS4 that sports an impressive exclusive library that's smaller than the Wii U's. I mean, even the PS4 is still getting support 10 years after it came out. I really think we're getting to the point where Sony is only making new hardware for money and not because there's any more technological advancements to be made. Speaking for myself, I simply don't think graphics, especially those that are trying to be realistic, are impressive anymore, and they haven't been for a decade. And unless the game looks like dog or runs as well as my grandma, most people don't really care about how games look. Well, aside from those who can play everything on their $18 billion giga computer that can run the Mortha Chicken 4K fan mod at 469 shits per second on their NVIDIA poop billion graphics card they mortgaged their house to purchase. Or in simpler terms, graphics prudes. I much prefer games with a cool art style or look to them. I think Silent Hill 1 looks better than half of the AAA games that come out nowadays. I know that somebody with no taste probably thinks I'm stupid for saying that, but this game has a distinct look and feel to it that hasn't been replicated in anything else I've played. The blocky graphics makes it harder to discern features on the monsters you encounter. I can barely... Hello?
Hello?
I can barely tell what I'm supposed to be up against, and that fear of the unknown makes this horror game even more frightening. Some might say it's aged poorly, but with all due respect, you're wrong. Compare this with a game like, I don't know, Twilight Princess. Not a bad looking game by any means. However, it was absolutely riding on the rising demand for realistic graphics in video games. When I was a kid, I used to think this game looked absolutely phenomenal. I was awestruck that the GameCube could even run a game that looked this good. And then I realized that there were a lot of other games on the GameCube that looked like this and had better art styles also. Again, I don't think this game looks bad, but it features some of my least favorite depictions of the series' iconic enemies. They just look nasty and derivative of monsters from other fantasy franchises. Compare this with Wind Waker, which was derided upon release for its cutesy art direction, that while it wasn't what fans wanted at the time, it ended up aging way better and having its style reused in several other titles following. I'm cool with realism when it doesn't detract too much from the gameplay or include things nobody asked for, but art direction that matches with the tone and feeling of the game it's accompanying will always reign supreme. I know this is going to make me sound like a Nintendo fan, which is a rather rude thing to insinuate. I mean, please, I'm not that bitchless. I've got more than one testicle. But as much as I do not like the company, I think their games are sterile and boring and will call them out on their numerous anti-consumer tactics, I can commend them for a couple of things. Like two things. This is going to sound like such a 2010-ass take, but Nintendo has prioritized fun over graphics for the longest time now. I mean, that should have been evident with the Wii. They don't pump their games with $18 billion budgets, and instead favor cheaper hardware that, while it absolutely has its shortcomings that I will call out, leads to them prioritizing an appealing look that doesn't destroy the budget instead of pumping billions of dollars into making sure Ochi's asshole looks realistic. They also have a much better track record with their employees as well and have repeatedly shown to not do crunch time. And what do you know, making games that don't necessarily need to sell hundreds of millions of copies to make their budget back and treating your employees well makes you a very successful company regardless. I still don't like them, but in a sea of terrible news regarding the working conditions of game companies, it's good to know that one can still offer entertainment to their consumers while not treating their employees like gum on their boots. It's just a shame that they still release games that aren't worth $60. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, but Tears of the Kingdom isn't worth $70. Nuh-uh, it reuses countless assets and maps from the game that came out 6 years prior, and they only charged $70 for it. Not because it was the pinnacle of quality for the company, but because they knew you'd buy it anyway because it's Zelda. Yeah, Sony may have set the precedent, but Nintendo followed, and I don't like it. Like, yeah, sure, they only did it one time so far with Tears of the Kingdom, but what they did is like copying Hitler's homework.
But you don't care. You never have, and believe me, you never will.
I don't want to make it sound like anyone who paid $70 for a video game is automatically a bootlicker, because that's a stupid thing to suggest. If you paid $70 for a game and you really liked it, then more power to you, and I'm glad that you felt that way. But dude, don't get upset if someone expresses discontentment for the price of a video game so long as they provide a good reason for feeling the way they do. I mean, you know, I wouldn't have spent this whole video complaining about video game pricing if I felt like games were actually worth it nowadays. There are so many reasons to be dissatisfied with how much games cost now. And with how many people there are out there in the world who aren't well off, of course they're going to be upset whenever they pay a big price for a game that's style over substance, that has better graphics but no good gameplay to offer. I don't want to make it out like every AAA release is like this, but games that have just as much effort put into their gameplay as they do their graphics are a rarity for me. So why would I want to shell out so much money for something that isn't as meaningful as games that came out a decade ago are? There have been very few times where I've purchased a game for full price, and as soon as I was done with it, I knew there was enough enjoyment to be had to say without hesitation that it was worth every last penny. There are too many buggy messes, anti-consumer practices, anti-developer practices, and too many not good games for me to be satisfied with the amount of money that I'm putting into a purchase, hoping that it will be something that truly impresses me, but it fails to for one reason or another. This isn't meant to devalue the effort that developers put into making games. If anything, I think publishers and the people not actually involved in the development process are to blame for this. If a company wants me to shell out big money for a game, then sure. but they've got to prove its worth. If you're going to demand a premium price from me, I'm going to demand something truly special. After all, why should I spend $70 on this shitty Persona 3 remake when I could play Fortnite for free and play as Leon Griffin and Brian Dog? Leon Griffin and Brian Dog not included. And if you're not going to give your developers the time and resources they need to make this giant project, then I can tell this is only being made to impress people who don't actually like video games and just want to watch a movie. All I can hope is that the recent success of cheaper games with smaller budgets can hammer in the message that games don't have to be giant blockbusters to be memorable or loved. It's only a matter of time before these bad practices cause the industry to implode on itself. Money is the end of it all. Can video games be worth $70? I don't think I could ever give a definitive answer to that question. But I wouldn't be asking that question if I could feel the quality of what we're given nowadays. But now, nothing I said is important. What's really important is those horse balls have to shrink in the cold.